welcome to the Vagabond Way podcast. The journey goes ever on with The Long Road. This episode, On a Bridge Across the River. The new single from The Long Road, On a Bridge Across the River, is out today. Join the Bishop, that's me, as I take a dive into the musical waters beneath said bridge, and Steve Bonham shares his own thoughts on the genesis of the song. Kev Moore takes us back to Memphis for a slice of life down Beale Street at the Blues Festival, and it's back to baguettes once more for me in the kitchen. The Vagabond Way podcast, featuring The Long Road, is exploring the world of the troubadour, the adventurer, the vagabond. The world isn't beige, it isn't processed, it's authentic, it's rich, and it's real. If those are the sorts of sentiments that make your brain light up, then hop on board. We are embracing all of those things, we're celebrating all of that, and we'd love it if you joined us on the journey. Greetings, I am Chris the Bish Leiden. Thanks for joining us once more. Straight to business today. We are thrilled to launch our new single, On a Bridge Across the River, today. It's available now on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, wherever you find your music, you should find it. Please listen, share, like. We're really pleased with it, and we're delighted to share it with the world today. More on that single in a moment. Before that, a very quick thank you to everyone who has watched our new YouTube show, which started on Tuesday, episode 1 of the Transatlantic Connection show. It features part 1 of an interview with award-winning American folk singer-songwriter Rob McHale. So please do check it out. Just search YouTube for the Transatlantic Connection Show, or visit our channel directly, youtube.com/The Vagabond Way. Again, like, subscribe, share if you like it. Today is an exciting day here at Vagabond HQ, the launch of our new single, On a Bridge Across the River, from our forthcoming EP, Out of the Darkness. What an appropriate title that is, I might hear you holler. Prescient, some might even say. Well, truth be told, I think we came up with the title Out of the Darkness before this pandemic really kicked in, and we certainly didn't know when we'd be releasing the EP, whether that would line up with this sort of slow emerging from the darkness that the world seems to be going through right now, with things starting to open up again slowly. Out of the Darkness will feature 4 songs, ultimately. We're launching On a Bridge Across the River, the first single, today. Then in a month will be If There's a God Out Here, our second single from this EP. We're trying this new release cycle out, you see. Smaller batches of new material, but more regularly. A sort of gentle drip feed of delights, which will, every so often, be pulled together into a larger collection, probably. An EP of 3 or 4 songs, or even an album of, 8, 10, 12 songs. The way the industry is now, the concept of an album as the sort of main focal point is rather out of the window. I think for creators it's still useful to have a focus to gather your ideas, a grouping somehow. We've got a plan for this upcoming EP of 4 songs and the EP after that. All those songs were recorded together at the start of 2020. They're all of a certain sort of time and place in our hearts and minds. But for the recordings we plan to release next year, we're in a different place. We've been through a different experience, particularly this year. So those recordings, although they might never exist on an album together, they're all born from the same place, and it's a different place to the 2020 recordings. So from our point of view, there will be themes and hopefully a sort of sense of home for our collections, and we'll be trying to convey this to the public in the in the flatter curve of release schedule we're going for through the artwork and the imagery. Anyway, so that's the first 2 singles on this EP. Today's On a Bridge Across the River, and then in a month, If There's a God Out Here. The next 2 tracks will be called Waiting on a Storm and Do You, and all 4 together form the Out of the Darkness EP. It's kind of funny to me, these first 2 singles, Bridge and God, have vaguely religious references in the lyrics, or indeed the title. It's kind of unusual for a band of, well, I don't think I'm out of place saying this, committed atheists. If There's a God Out Here, which we'll look at in more detail in the weeks to come as it gets released, more overt seemingly, but actually probably deeply metaphorical. A cry to the universe, a questioning of the state of things, a demand even to shake things up. I think you'll like this one when it comes around to it. Anyway, back to On a Bridge Across the River. I'm hoping you'll join in the choruses on this one. It's a belter. Funnily enough, this wasn't our first choice for the lead single from this EP, though. As is often the way, a tiny little suggestion from Steve snowballs, and all of a sudden things change. You know, when I first heard this track, when we were rehearsing it, must have been the end of last year now, I guess, I knew there were some great bits in it. The chorus is so evocative in the lyrics and the chords, the music, the harmonies to me. It's an instant transport. I love it too because this one has one of those trademark Steve Bonham glitches in it where he had no idea that was happening, but it absolutely had to stay, for, in my opinion, a bar of 3 thrown in amongst the very regular bars of 4. I think it's glorious in as much as you probably don't notice it, but it would feel different if it wasn't there. Kev does some true heroics on this single too. You'll hear it right from the start. Vocal gymnastics to be proud of here, plus wild guitar and bass playing and drums. Kev works out on this one. One of my favourite memories of being in the studio was layering up the vocals on the chorus for this one. And through the fog of time, I can't quite remember who was egging on who the most, to be honest. Stuart, the engineer at Woodworm Studios, has a delightfully evil streak sometimes, and his response to a casual "more" is "yeah." And so layers upon layers of vocals go on this one. I'm as guilty of it sometimes. Kev is as well, although he won't admit it, I'm sure. And it bloody works. I love it. I think one of the most challenging decisions we've had to make as a band in the studio in the process of recording any of these songs in the last year was, do we crack out the Hammond organ? Does it violate our code of artisan acoustic instruments? Do we even have time? And the answers were, yes, crack it out. No, although it's electric, it's not exactly a MacBook, is it? And not really got time, but let's just get on with it. And I'm so glad we did. It just adds a beautiful richness to this song, which it just didn't have before. Looking back now, we kind of left the studio with this song, bare bones. It was fine, but it didn't really make our hearts sing, I don't think. But actually, after living with it for a little while, settling into it, thinking on things, and a little bit of lockdown tweaking, adding a few bits, boy, oh boy, does it make my heart sing. And I hope it does you too. Just a quick shout out before we play the song. The single artwork that Kev put together uses a photograph from a Nashville resident. The song is set in and was born in Nashville, Tennessee, you see. And we're super grateful to that photographer, Gerald Feigl, hope I'm pronouncing that right, for letting us use the image for the artwork. So, here we go. Sit back, headphones on, eyes closed, relax, and enjoy the new single from Steve Bonham and the Long Road. It's called On a Bridge Across the River.
Across the river, such a weed was in the air, we're called on to deliver. A preacher who was calling out to let the Lord in. You wanna appreciate the cure you got, gotta know the sin. Good news is hard to come by, so let me give it to you. The football fans just passed by, no some said hallelujah. The kids they roll on shoulders of the titans and the lame. The young men they just hollered out to lose would be a shame. This journey's done, won't you tie me to a tree? And the girls who knew a thing or two sang that ain't how it's gonna be. Hey Lord, set us free. Hey my Lord, set us free. drummers played a role, and the dark-haired girl in leather band sang a far more song.
Steve Bonham, the vagabond philosopher, telling us the story of the night before and the morning of the birth of that song, or the first ideas for that song. Over to Steve.
I got into Nashville late that night, into a cheap motel downtown, and spent the next day working out what my set would be that evening for my Nashville debut. It was one of those showcase sessions, quite terrifying. There were 2 Grammy Award winners there and little old me. But it seemed to go okay. And I went to bed that night feeling quite pleased with myself. In the morning, I got up and went looking for breakfast and a decent coffee. I walked down the streets past the Johnny Cash Museum and along Broadway, which was pleasantly quiet and subdued, without the over-amplified soft rock that passes for country music in that part of town. I stopped for a while in the sun, had a coffee, and then headed instinctively towards the Nissan Stadium, where there's a pedestrian bridge across the river. As I sat there looking at the river, a preacher started to call out with a microphone and a little amplifier there. There was going to be a football match, and it was Sunday morning, and there were people he could save walking across the bridge to see the Nashville Titans play the Kansas City Chiefs. He was hollering out all these great lines, one after the other. The first and most memorable was, "If you want to appreciate the cure, you've got to know the sin." And I don't know if he meant it that way, but I thought, wow, bloomin' heck, that's an invitation to a good life if I ever heard one. But I kept listening to him, and I quite admired the way he kept calling out to the people walking past who were ignoring him mostly. And I just sat in the sun, and I had this tremendous, almost surreal experience on this very modern bridge with the crowds of families going over to watch the game and crossing the Cumberland River coming up from the sea, of being looked on by the past. Rivers are always the borderlands between one world and the next, the future and the past, the earth, the sky and the water, despair and salvation. Not so many people realise that long before it was a music city, Nashville was a port with all the light and dark and the mysterious that every port in the world has. The great riverboats came up here with gamblers and drunks and ladies of doubtful virtue and the whole mess of humanity. Captain Thomas Ryman ran more boats than most, enjoying the great profits of travel and sin, until he saw the light and built the Tabernacle Church, which then became the Ryman Auditorium. And Nashville had been a slave place as well. Messrs. Glover and Boyd, Dobbs and Porter and a few others would be pleased to meet your needs for slaves at their businesses down on Cedar Street. And I started to hear in my own head those ghosts of the past coming out of the water, coming out of the river, imagining the riverboats coming up with great smoking stacks as well as their big wheels turning. And I just took out my iPad and I typed in the whole lyric and took it with me and started to put it together. At first it was quite a slow song, but then I got this riffy thing going I was doing, and almost from the start I heard what that song should sound like in my head, even though I couldn't express that in any intelligible way. We went into the studio and we had a good stab at it. We got Chris to play the Hammond organ. He gave it a deeper sound, this big, gruff, growling sound. A Hammond organ, for those who've never met one, is really, it's a terrifying instrument. It's all electric cables and switches and whirring fans and speakers and boxes and banks of keys. It's like something that's come up from the swamp. Wow, that made a big difference to the song. And it was good, but I was still made restless by it. It didn't match what I'd had in my head, or the feeling I'd had in my head that day when I was sitting on the bridge. And despite the rule that we've always had, don't keep on doing what you've done, I just said to Kev and Chris, can we do a bit more? And that night Kev came back and he'd recorded some hollering. Yeah, he really went for it. Hollering on the track, and he nailed it right away. The mix to me of the Hammond organ and Kev's almost tribal singing is extraordinary. The vocals anyway on that track from Chris and Kev, particularly Kev on this one, are amazing. But this free-form, almost pagan hollering going on top of a story about a preacher on a bridge, well, it conjures up the images of onlookers, the spirits of the past, the Native Americans, the slaves, the dispossessed, looking on in wonder at the scene. Perfect. It just sums up the deep, dark web of life. I love it.
And now you've heard the song and heard some more about how it came about, maybe you want to go back and listen to it again. Scoot back 10 minutes or so in this podcast and have another listen. See what new pictures crop up in your mind for you. We've also put together a music video for the song too. If you search YouTube for On a Bridge Across the River, Steve Bonham and the Long Road, you will find it.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Kev's Cafe Corner once more. And this week, yet again, we're going to be hanging around in Memphis because, well, it's that kind of town. Now, when I was there to check out Elvis's old pad and what have you and pay my respects, I also happened to be there coincidentally when the International Blues Festival was going on, which is basically a festival that takes over Beale Street and the many venues that are there. And you can sort of buy a wristband for a very small price, something like $10, I think. And that entitles you to admission to every venue down Beale Street. And there's a lot of them, basically for the week. So you can just go and check out all these amazing bands, willy-nilly, for next to nothing. So a good time was had by all. And that brings me to this week's cafe, which was the Rum Boogie Cafe. And I'm going to tell you the story. I'm going to tell you it by going back to some notes that I made after my trip there, which was in 2010. I'm going to read you a short passage that I wrote when I was working on the album Blue Odyssey as I returned. Here we go. I was working yesterday on XXX, quite an involved track from the Blue Odyssey project, and I was kind of hitting a wall with it. I sat there noodling about on the guitar and a riff came to me. By the end of the afternoon, I had another song for the project, appropriately entitled Blew Me Away. I really feel the creative juices flowing right now. It's great. I need to try and squeeze this onto the album. It's looking like it will clock in at just under 80 minutes, which is the absolute max for a single CD. So any other ideas I have will have to wait for the next one. The lyrics fit right into the theme of the album. This is one about watching the bands down on Beale Street in Memphis during the International Blues Challenge, and in particular one guitarist who caught my eye, or should that be ear, playing with the Nico Wayne Toussaint Band, Josh Pitbull of Blues Growand. He really had all the chops, and it's always a pleasure to listen to someone who really knows their instrument. He used the old trick of playing a solo with a bottle of beer, so I wrote that into the storyline of the song. I take him a beer, and instead of drinking it, he plays a solo with it. I can't claim to come anywhere near the standard of Josh's playing, and although I got to compliment him on his set, I didn't get to buy him a beer in real life. But well, if you're reading this, mate, you inspired a song. So there you go. That's the story about the song that I created after going into the Rum Boogie Cafe, which is a bit of it's kind of like a shabby chic hard rock cafe, but it's cooler, it's not as sort of corporate. It's a great place, and the Nico Wayne Toussaint Band were amazing, and Josh really stood out as a guitarist. And that's simply his playing and what he did on stage inspired me to write this song, which made it onto my album. So if you're ever down in Memphis, in Beale Street, I think it's the first intersection about halfway down, the Rum Boogie Cafe, great place to visit and always great music. This is my song that's inspired by Josh's playing and inspired by Memphis in particular as well, I guess. It's called Blew Me Away.
It's cold outside, so I stopped into a bar that day. I bought me a beer, looked up to the stage, and the blues man began to play. Oh, he wailed on the guitar, oh, Lord, it blew me away. Hear him play. That guitar, blow me away. Pick up that guitar, blow me away. Pick up that guitar, blow me away. Pick up that guitar, blow me away. Well, he brought me the news. Let me give you the news. I'll take a 6-pack of beer and a real bad case of the blues. Well, I walked up to the stage. I said, buddy, here's a cold one. He said, that's something I sure could use. I said, I get that, man. I'd be working a Thursday if I was up there in your shoes. He said, I ain't gonna drink it. This bus for the blues. That guitar, blow
six-pack of beer and a real bad case of the blues. Blew me away. And a nice postscript to that story is Marie, Josh's wife, found my article on the internet back in 2011, I think, when I'd done the album. And she was really overjoyed and showed it to Josh, so he knows that the song was written with him in mind, which is lovely. Take care, everyone. See you next week.
In this week's Bishop's Daily Bread, I'm talking bread. It doesn't happen with the regularity you might imagine for a section of the podcast with bread in the title, but this week is bread. Baguettes, experiment number 2, much better results. Thank you, Jackie, for your tips. But still not quite the stunning that I'm after, if I'm honest. I wonder what it is. The ingredients, the mixing, the kneading, the proving, the recipe itself, the baking temperature. Wonder if it needs to be in a hotter oven, perhaps. The baguettes I made were good, but they didn't have that crunch, that characteristic crunch that baguettes should have. I thought that the tray of ice cubes in the bottom of the oven trick was supposed to help with that. And to be honest, the aeration inside wasn't as good as I want it to be. It was good in places, but terribly regular elsewhere, just like a normal loaf, really. And I think for a proper sort of French baguette, the sort that I'm imagining anyway, the insides are much less regular. And I'm sure that's down to the mixing, kneading, proving. I've used a Paul Hollywood recipe for both experiments now, but perhaps I need to turn elsewhere. Fabulously, the internet, no doubt, will be full of baguette recipes, each one as authentic or inauthentic as the next. I shall keep on experimenting, keep on tweaking. It's fun, isn't it, to have new worlds to explore, new things to try. Gloriously, it also doesn't matter much if I completely mess up. So often in life, people are holding themselves back for fear of f***ing up. Me included. It's wonderfully freeing to be able to indulge in something, really enjoy the result, really want to get better at it, even good at it, but not having the fear of it, mattering. It's liberating in many ways. Anyway, I'm off to the kitchen again in a mo to see if I can't just f*** up a little. Thank you for listening, wherever in the world you are. That is the end of this week's episode. Remember to subscribe to this podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify. The next episode will be out next Friday. Join us on YouTube as well for the Transatlantic Connection show and become part of the Transatlantic Connection movement. Head to youtube.com/The Vagabond Way. Find us on Facebook, The Vagabond Way, or Steve Bonham on the Long Road. You should find us. All of our music is on Spotify and Apple Music. Go and have a listen. Give us a follow if you like what you hear. Maybe share it with a pal who you think might like it as well. We are on Patreon at patreon.com/The Vagabond Way. Big thank you to our Patreons and a special shout out to Orla Flynn, James Lydon, Yvette Lydon and Trish Taylor. Thank you for making all of this possible. Patreon is a great platform that makes it super easy for anyone out there, to support content that you love on a monthly basis. It gives you direct access to the people creating the stuff you love, us, hopefully, and you get to play an integral part in shaping the direction of things that we make. So, become a vagabonder. That's our name for our supporters on Patreon, to help us create music, live performances, books and short stories, this weekly podcast, our YouTube show, and some other new things we are cooking up. As a vagabonder, you can get the recordings and books we make for free, receive exclusive Patreon-only merchandise in the post, get regular behind-the-scenes updates from us, unlock access to exclusive live-stream performances and Q&As, and lots more. You can help us create something different, something that entertains, and something that inspires others. So, join us on the journey and release the vagabond within. Patreon.com/The Vagabond Way. Thank you once again, brave adventurers, vagabonds, and explorers for joining us on The Vagabond Way. Remember, the world isn't beige, it's authentic, it's rich, and it's real. Embrace every last bit of it. Until next time, the journey goes ever on with The Long Road. Bye for now.
Love.